just because it's designed to be more of this executive model, or you hear the terminology, semi-absentee, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do the work and you don't have to, have some level of involvement. The more time you're willing to put in the beginning, the better of a foundation you're going to have for your business.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Wes Barefoot. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, Rick. How's it going, man?
It's going well. Listen, it was good to see you a couple months ago, and I'm seeing less of you now. It looked like you might have lost some body fat. Is that the case?
That's the case, man. I'm working on it. I've got a ways to go still, but working on it. Still trying to be you when I grow up. So we'll see.
Well, I'm old enough to be your pappy, so I think it's a good goal for you, actually. Like, it would make sense. And Look, we'll have you back on. Since you're on this journey, we had a little bit of pre-podcast conversation about it. Look, you've hired an online coach and you're on the right path, and it's exactly what we would prescribe from Alloy. So can't wait to see where you end up. We'll have you back on for a third time and talk about your journey there and how all that looks. But
it's been good so far.
Man, since you're a man of many talents, I think today I want to pick your brain and get your thoughts on something that you have a lot of experience with. So for those of you guys that don't remember Wes from the first time he was on the podcast, he is a franchise consultant with Franchoice, which is a fantastic organization. I think we get around 80% of our consultant leads from Franchoice. So they are a huge source of business for us. Quality people all the way around. Wes is one of my favorite dudes, not just because he does that, but he's just a good guy all around. We see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. But the interesting thing about Wes is not only is he a franchise consultant, so he's finding good placements, opportunities for his investors in the franchise space. He's also a franchisee himself, and he's got a long history of entrepreneurship as well. So I wanted to have him on. And Wes, I'd like to discuss the character traits of a successful franchisee. You've obviously placed a lot of people in franchises. You are a franchisee, so you got a very unique lens on this thing. So I'd love to just pick your brain about that. So, I know that I gave you a bit of a heads up, so you might have some ideas in mind, but let's dig in. What do you think makes a really good franchisee?
Yeah, I love this topic. I was excited when, you asked if I'd come and talk with you again, and that this was kind of the topic that you wanted to talk about, because it's, in my experience, some of it's like, it's going to sound real basic, right? Like common sense, but people still get it wrong as franchisees. And then some of it, I think is a little bit counterintuitive to what some people, may think what a successful franchisee should be doing. So, and like you mentioned, just to give a little more context in terms of, me as a franchisee. So my wife and I are currently franchisees with two different brands. So we've had two stabs at this point. One franchise, we are coming up on 5 years in business. Been a very successful venture for us, and I would consider ourselves good franchisees in that business. And I'll elaborate more on what I mean by good franchisee. The second brand that we invested in, we are coming up on 2 years in business. So, this is a more recent venture for us. And I would say that we have not been as good of franchisees in this business. And, the business itself is doing fairly well, but in terms of me and my wife as the franchise owners, I don't think that we have done as good of a job as we did with our first one. And we can maybe get into some of why that is. But so anyways, the first thing I would say to anyone out there that is a franchise owner or is considering franchise ownership, keys to being successful. First thing is realistic expectations. And this is where I think it may be a bit counterintuitive for some, or I think some people just come in with unrealistic expectations of what it means to be a franchisee and what they are getting, when they buy into a franchise system. So, the first thing under this kind of realistic expectations category is, look, at the end of the day, it's a business still, right? So there's no replacement for hard work. There's no replacement for grit, right? Any entrepreneur out there, franchise owner or not, will tell you it's a freaking roller coaster, right? It's an emotional roller coaster. You're going to have good days. You're going to have, okay days, and you're going to have some really crappy days. And hopefully you have far more of the great days than you do the crappy days. But like those crappy days will be there. That's a reality. and there's no way around that. Buying a franchise doesn't avoid any of that entirely, right? It can, certainly help you avoid making mistakes that you very likely would make if you didn't have the guidance and kind of the blueprint to follow, that the franchisor has already established. But there's no replacement for hard work. It's not the franchisor's job to come in and build your business for you. Right. I think some people, they think of a franchise and they think it's just this, this easy button that they can hit it and boom, they've got a profitable business. And in some ways, it is a bit of an easy button, right? I kind of just think of it as you're working smarter instead of like really, really hard. There's still a lot of hard work, but you are working smarter in the sense that you're following this blueprint. You've got systems and processes, and there's a variety of different support mechanisms that the franchisor should have in place. So I think, one way to maybe give a little perspective to this, I have a really good friend and mentor. Him, Rick, Dave Pasgan. I've learned so much from this guy over the years, and he was the CEO of the first franchise brand that I went to work for. This is way back in my career before, we owned franchises and I was doing consulting work. And, Dave used to tell prospective franchisees when they were coming in for discovery day, for this brand, he would give this analogy of, how franchising works. And I think it's a really good description, but he called it the bike analogy, right? So if you imagine a bicycle, there's all different types of bikes, right? You've got road bikes, you've got cruisers, you've got bikes that are built for racing or speed. So, that's kind of an analogy in that you've got tons of different types of franchises out there, right? You've got these different business models, these different vehicles, right? So what's the right bike for one person's not necessarily going to be the right bike for someone else. So, that's a whole nother podcast episode, right? In terms of, finding the right bike for you or the right franchise for you. But if you're looking at it as a bike, it's the franchisor's job to build the best damn bike that they can, right? To make it sturdy, to make it reliable, all the bells and whistles. They've got to make a really, really good bike. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good of a bike you have. If no one gets on it and pedals it, it doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's the franchisee's job to get on the bike and pedal it. Right. And, I'm sure you're seeing this as your, brand continues to grow and you have more and more franchisees. I see this in the brands that we own where not every franchisee is as good of a peddler as others or is willing to pedal as hard as other franchisees. Right. So you got, franchise owners that all essentially own the same bike. Right. But some of them go faster, some of them go further than others because they're willing to get on it and pedal their ass off. Right. So
yeah,
I think
let me ask you about that, right? Because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my thought, but it's really interesting that you say that. So I think one of the things that maybe we could have done better early on is, I love the bike analogy. We probably could have communicated that better. I think when you look at it, like we have great franchisees, and to your point, some are Lance Armstrong and some are with training wheels, and that's fine, dude. That's part of the process, right? But I think you run the risk as being on the franchisor side, if you're not careful, of communicating that you're basically running their business, which we're not. And I think we were surprised in some cases, not all, but some cases, to hear things that would indicate that maybe the franchisee's expectations were that there was a lot of business functions that they should be doing that we would handle on their behalf. And I think we were a little taken aback by it early on. Like, wait, what? Like, why would you think that we would be, responsible for doing that? It's your business. And I'm saying that air quotes, but it is. So I like the bike analogy. I think we've experienced that as well. So maybe the follow-up question I have to that is, how culpable or what responsibility do you think the franchisor has, like me as an example, to communicate that well to the franchisee? Because expectations, as you know, Wes, are everything. So if we go in saying, you don't have to do this, you don't have to, we're going to handle all that. Like there's one of our features is we have a great pre-sale. Like, we're going to pre-sell the gym full. We're going to do this. We have a sales team. If you choose to hire us, we can even do your phone sales. I mean, all these things are in place, but we have to be careful with that because eventually it's a 10-year agreement. Like, you're going to have to get in there and run your business.
Yeah.
and we've given you all the tools to do so. So what would you recommend to me as a franchisor, or maybe to any franchisees that are in a situation where they have these expectations? Is some of that, could franchisors do a better job of communicating? I guess would be my question to you, selfishly.
Yeah. No. I think it's a really good question. And, first thing I'll say is I chuckled a little bit when you're like, I think we could have done better, of this early on. That's every franchisor, right? Like every franchisor that I've worked with, like in the early days when they're really just getting started and trying to recruit that first wave of franchisees, like, yeah, it's difficult to properly set the expectations right. And, you are, hungry to get those first franchisees in. So you're, really trying to kind of sell them on why you're going to be such a good partner for them. So anyways, I think that's normal, and good brands like Alloy, I know how dedicated you are to learning and improving and always getting better. So, you're figuring these things out way earlier than a lot of brands do. I can promise you that. So that's all good. Yeah, I mean, in terms of expectations, I think just being as clear and as realistic as possible, right? Because the temptation is there to, to some extent sugarcoat things a little bit when you're talking to a prospective franchisee. So I think the more raw that you can be with them in terms of like, look, here's the great things of this business. Here's where, we as the franchisor can really, really excel in helping you as the franchisee. But here's the things we're not in as good of a position to help with. Right. And so this is where we need you as the franchisee to be really, really strong. So I think, one thing is, I know this is something I spend a lot of time with the candidates that I coach through my process, before we ever start talking about specific franchise brands or even specific industries, really, we spend a lot of time talking about, what do they want their day-to-day life as a business owner to look like? And what are the types of activities they would prefer to spend most of their time on, and what are the types of things they'd rather not have to do because it doesn't play to their strengths or their skill sets, or they simply don't enjoy it, right? So I think for you guys as a franchisor, you have a good sense of what are the best activities that your franchisees should be spending the majority of their time and energy on. So hit them with that in the face and don't sugarcoat it. Right. Because, if like, hey, this is where 90% of our franchise owners' time should be spent because that's where they're going to get the best ROI on their time. Like, they need to know that. And if they're not comfortable with that because it isn't, they're playing to their strengths, or they wouldn't enjoy it, like, much better that they figure that out before they've signed a franchise agreement with you and wired you a bunch of money for franchise fees. Better for you too. Right.
No, 100%. I would say, to your point early on, I was handling all franchise development. Right now, we work with the Repum Group as our FSO, and they do a great job of it. And I think early on, there's just so much intimacy there, and it was probably my fault if there was some false expectations set. Now, that being said, a lot of those folks are killing it and have owned it. But some of the comments from the ones that might have struggled early on, even in the transition of learning to become entrepreneurs coming out of big corporate, and it's like, it's a different animal, right? The certain skill sets that you need. And so it was just a learning curve. And to your point, it doesn't take us long to figure things out. And so our message is completely different now, knowing, what 3-4 months in looks like, where someone's like, oh, I thought you guys would do that. I'm like, why would you think? It's like, I don't have to do that anymore because there's clear expectations. It's like, you have to hire and lead the right people. I'm going to give you a million tools to help you. At the end of the day, you can still screw it up. Fair enough. And they're like, fair enough. I'm like, great, because this is your baby. This is your business, So I'm glad to hear you say that. And you're right. Like your inclination about where we kind of started for the first 20 or so that I sold, that was exactly what happened. And we've already remedied that, in a great way. So I'm glad to hear that we're not abnormal. If that makes sense.
Well, and yeah, not at all. And I would say you guys are far ahead of so many brands, in terms of just what if you look at the number of locations that you have open and in development, there's brands that have far more locations than you guys that are still trying to figure out, some of the stuff. So you guys are light years ahead in a lot of ways, I think. One kind of, I guess, follow up to that your question, what can the franchisor do? Like now you're at a point where you've got franchisees that you can lean on to help with this too, right? We know how important being able to validate with existing owners is for a candidate, right? It's a big part of how they're going to get some of their questions answered, and they're going to get confident that the franchise could be a good fit for them. But you can use that to your advantage as a franchisor as well, because your franchisees should be self-regulating to an extent, right? Where if they talk to someone and they just really get the sense that that person doesn't get it, or they don't have realistic expectations for what they're going to have to do to be successful in the business, like your franchisees can give you a heads up on that, right? And so
and we've had that, right? I mean, obviously we're validating, and folks, as you know, go through the FDD, call everybody in the system. Like that's the advice, but we're probably going to put you on the phones with the ones that we feel like can communicate well. And they didn't always start out great. They might have started out a bit lumpy, and then now they got a full facility. And I mean, look, it's a good story. Like if you open making money, regardless, even if it's hard, it's still a good story to tell. But the hard part, to your point, I think you said the word grit. You're going to have it. I mean, it's not for wimps. It's like we're going to mitigate as much risk as possible. You're far more likely to be successful in a franchise than if you go it alone. That being said, it's still hard. And like, so what? Like, you're on a weight loss journey. It's like we talked about before. You're like, people are underwhelmed at how simple it can be. But it's still not easy, simple, but not easy, right? And I think it's the same thing with business. Like we're going to give you a turnkey model. Alloy is a very simple model to understand, and we work really hard to make it that way. Doesn't mean it's easy. You still have to hire people. There's people involved. There's customers that are people. There's people that work with you that are people. All those things are difficult. They're not static.
People are hard. People are hard. My wife and I joke all the time. We're like, man, if we didn't have customers or employees, this business ownership thing would be pretty easy, Right.
You see that first McDonald's that's fully automated now. It's kind of like, all right, well, maybe food goes there, and it's like, sounds great, but that's not most businesses, and it certainly isn't ours. So like you said, you're going to have to deal with people. And the best way I've heard, entrepreneurship described is it's a self-help journey disguised as a business. And so your business is probably only going to grow as far as you can grow, right? So like we teach, we use the EOS, from Traction, we use the EOS system. We teach it to our franchisees. So we do we do a phone call before the investor goes out to hire folks so that they have the lens on the get it once it has capacity for it. That whole idea matches all our core values. And then when they come to training, we have an EOS implementer come out and teach a half day here for not only the investor, but the operating partner who's going to be running the thing, right? So we do our best to give you all the tools. But to your point, Wes, at the end of the day, you got to be wired the right way. You got to be tough, and you got to be able to suck it up and understand that not every day is sunshine and roses, but the juice is worth the squeeze, but you still have to work hard.
Yeah. Well, that right there with the recruiting piece and implementing EOS and building a culture around that, like that's such a good example of where, like, you guys as the franchisor, that's an added feature and benefit of the bicycle, right? And that's a really, really nice feature to have, but it's still up to the franchisee to use that feature and implement it in their business, right? You can tee it up for them, dude. Like, hey, here's EOS. We send an implementer out
to
we
work
put a
with
basket
on the front of the bike. Just go put your stuff in there.
Yeah,
but you got to
exactly
put stuff
right.
in there. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so I'll leave this last point, in terms of just the realistic expectations with one final thought. This is from another mentor of mine. This guy's owned at least 6 or 7 different franchise businesses over the years. He's had non-franchise businesses. He's been the CEO of a franchise system. So, pretty well-rounded perspective, I would say. And something he said to me many times that's really stuck with me is, Wes, it's not the franchisor's responsibility to make you be successful, right? The franchisor cannot prevent you from being successful. They can only help you be more successful. And the context that he was sharing that in is he got into a franchise where he was literally like franchisee number 2 or number 3. And they got up to like 7 or 8 franchisees. And then the franchisor just decided, I don't want to be a franchisor. I don't want to support the franchisees. They never sold another franchise. they never really delivered on any of the support that they were supposed to, yet he's still paying these royalties and everything. And he built that business. He hated every minute of it, but he built that business and sold it for a multiple. And it just really kind of proved the point that, the franchisor can't keep you from being successful. They should be there to help you be more successful and to help facilitate these things like we've talked about. But at the end of the day, it's not their responsibility to make you successful, because they're not there to do the work for you.
I love hearing that, because I know that you're coaching people through this process, but I think you're so unique in the sense that you're a franchisee, right? You are a franchise owner of two brands. And so you've got this duality in your responses. Love it, man. All right, what do you got? What's next?
Yeah, man, this is the one that's going to sound like common sense, but I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it. It still blows my mind to this day after like a decade in franchising. Follow the system. If you buy into a franchise, follow the system.
What?
Crazy, right?
It's crazy idea. Right.
But I've seen it far too many times where, someone comes in and, they haven't even opened for business yet, and they're, pushing back on what the franchisor is telling them to do. Right. They're thinking that they have a better way to do it. And there's, a million different ways that this can transpire, and some are more subtle than others. But it's like, look, if you got to the point through the research and due diligence that you did to be comfortable signing an agreement for 10 years and, wiring a bunch of money to operate this business, like, follow it. Right. And there's balance to this, like there is in most things. Right. I'm not saying, once you're an established franchisee, never come to the table with any ideas, or never think outside of the box, right, or, never try things that may enhance your business. But get to a certain point before you start worrying about any of that. Like, learn the basics, kind of almost follow blindly until you know enough to know, what may or may not make sense to think about tweaking in the business. So, yeah, man, like I said, I know that sounds basic, but it happens way more, than
you see both sides
of
it, right? So you're putting candidates into franchises and giving them this advice, which is invaluable. By the way, anybody listening, that's why as a franchise brand, you want to work with consultant networks, because they're helping align expectations for you as well. So it's part of the sales process, but they're also prepping really good franchise candidates for you. So I love it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm sure you've heard of Cameron Herold, right? I mean, he's just a big name in the industry, and he cut his teeth. I think he was what, college pro painters or something. He was the number one franchise. And then the 1-800 got junk.
Yep.
And, I remember listening to him say that, and he's like, we always just did. I think his father told him, like, you're not good at creating stuff. You just grab someone else's idea and go make money with it, which would turn him to franchising. So here he is in college, and he becomes the number 2 franchisee at College Painters. And he's like, I did everything they said. Like, in the manual, it said, buy yellow key rings. I went and bought yellow key rings. He's like, so I was the number 2. He's like, my sister became a franchisee after me. She was the number 1 franchisee. You know why? She did exactly what the franchisor told you. And this sounds like I'm being defensive as a franchisor. I'm not. I'm just giving you the landscape of what he said is like, the franchisor spends a ton of time to create a vehicle that will make you successful. Do what they say. Like, it's the most aligned business model I've ever seen, where, like, I get a royalty, which is a percentage of your top line revenue. I need you to be successful. I'm only giving you advice that will help you be successful. So run the play. And he described the ideal franchisee in that conversation as like I think he called it like an entrepreneur. And it's sort of this interesting mix, like someone who's willing to follow a system, who kind of wants to be part of a system and be kind of on a team, if you will, doesn't want to do it alone. I've heard, a franchise consultant that you work with say, be in business for yourself, not by yourself. And I think that's a good way to put it. Like, look, you want to be part of a system. You're not a maverick per se, but you recognize that you do want to be an entrepreneurial, right? And so you have enough risk tolerance to take on a project that you are ultimately responsible for, let's face it.
Yep.
But you also don't want to be completely alone. You want the bandwidth and the community and all the good things that come with a franchise. So it's a unique individual, I think. I mean, you can't be too entrepreneurial, to your point, or you'll try to recreate the wheel. But you do need that little bit of that spirit to have like a risk tolerance. We always call in our 5 core values, one of them is a competitive spirit. And it's like, why?
Mm.
It's like, well, you just got to be wired to want to win, right? It doesn't mean that you want to recreate the wheel, but I need you to be competitive in the way that you're going to go out. And let's say that there's some interesting marketing initiative that's very specific to your market. You'll take the initiative to build the thing, right, and go do it, not necessarily turn to us and be like, hey, why don't you have a digital billboard play or something that might only work in that one strategic market. It's like, understanding that we're working together to try to move this thing forward. And if you need something done that's not in the bigger system right now because it's a bit of an outlier situation, just build it and go. And then maybe the franchise system adopts it. Then maybe we build something that you take advantage of. And it's this sort of walking hand in hand for at least the next 10 years, to move the ball down the field. And I thought that was a unique way to put it. But to your point, again, it seems so simple, but I think it's a really, really valid point. And I know you said that you met with your wife, offline, and you guys compared notes and came up, combined your top 3. So it's interesting that you came up with one that was so obvious, right?
Yeah. But it's because, my wife and I have both seen it, right? And we've been guilty of it at times and as franchisees in our businesses. And, it's like anything else in life, right? It's not, owning a franchise is not going to be like static in the sense that like you should be evolving as a business owner as your business evolves as well, right? So I think that definitely franchisees need to be very entrepreneurial, but there are people out there that are just too entrepreneurial to be comfortable operating within the boundaries of a franchise system. But you want to be entrepreneurial. It's just like that's probably not where you want to spend most of your time and energy in the first 6 to 12 to 18 months. Like, figure out the business, get your feet underneath you, lay the foundation, right? And these are the areas that, the franchisor should really have figured out. And it's going to save you a ton of time, probably a ton of money, and, avoiding mistakes and pitfalls along the way. But once you're established, that's when you really want your franchisees to be proactive, right? And to take the ball and run with it. Hey, I've got an idea. Instead of sitting around and waiting on corporate to do it for you, like, go try it, see if it works, and then report back, right? And then you can collaborate with the franchisor, with other franchisees. I've seen plenty of examples, where a franchisee piloted something new in their market, and 2 years later, it's a standard best practice across the system, right?
Yeah,
It
even
came
big
from a
marketing
franchisee.
plays, they come out of food sometimes. I mean, like it looks bad in hindsight now, but like Jared from Subway, right? But like barring all the weird shit that came out of that eventually. But early on, it was like he was just a customer at a local franchisee, and it became like, wow, this guy's using Subway as a healthy choice to lose all this weight. So that became a national marketing campaign for them. So that's really in the spirit of franchising what it should look like, right?
Yeah. And that really ties into kind of the last point, that I was going to make is, as a franchisee, it's going to help you be more successful, but I also believe it is your responsibility to participate and collaborate amongst the rest of the system, right? You used the phrase earlier. I love this phrase. When you buy into a franchise, you're in business for yourself. It's your business. It's your responsibility, but you're not in business by yourself, right? So don't be that guy or that girl that, tries to just put their head down and operate in a silo and not contribute at all, right? Because one, you're likely to not learn nearly as much as you would if you were making a conscious effort to, develop relationships with other franchise owners and collaborate with them and, communicate on a regular basis with the franchisor. It's going to benefit you in so many different ways, but it's also your responsibility to pay it forward, right? I have to get on to my wife about this a little bit. She never listens to any of my podcast stuff, so I feel pretty safe saying this. I wouldn't say it in front of her, but I have to get on to her every now and then, right? Because like in our one franchise that we've, had for coming up on 5 years, like she is looked at as a top performer, right? Every franchisee wants time with her, especially the new people coming in, right? She gets, because of the numbers in the FDD and whatnot, like as people are researching that franchise, like everyone wants to talk to Kelly. And she got to a point and we've got young kids and stuff. So like there's some excuse for this, I guess. But she was like, you need to do all the validation calls. I'm so tired of, just spending so much time on this. And I'm like, look, that's fine, but you need to understand why it's important for you to make the time to do these calls. Because one, think back to all the people that have helped you, along the way with building the Shelf Genie business, right? Not even just the people that you maybe validated with before we signed the franchise agreements and how helpful being able to have those conversations were, but think about the people that have helped you, when you were 1 month into the business, 6 months into the business. Think about the guy you called last week and, ran an issue by, and he's like, oh yeah, I've had that before. Here's how I handled it. To me, it's a responsibility. And it's going to benefit you again. Like when it comes to spending time to validate, like I want to have some input in who's coming in as franchisees, right? Because kind of like we talked about earlier, if I do a validation call with someone from one of my brands and I think they're really strong, like I'm going to follow up with the franchisor and be like, hey, just so you know, I had a great conversation with them. They asked really good questions. I think they really get it. On the flip side of that, if I talk to someone and I really don't feel they get it, it's not my responsibility to say, hey, don't sell a franchise to them. That's not my place, right? But I can share my feedback, right? And say, hey, you may want to spend a little more time with this person and make sure they really understand, what the expectations of them as a franchise owner are going to be if they want to be successful, right? And why is that beneficial for me as a franchisee? I mean, we're in North Carolina. This could be someone on the other side of the country that I'm talking to. But the better my brand does, right, the more successful franchisees that are running really good businesses, the more valuable, my local franchise businesses, because as the brand grows, the value for everyone grows. So I think these things are important. And we talked about, how innovation can come from franchisees as well. So, when the time is right, and I don't know that there's like a magic rule of like, all right, well, you have to be in business for at least 24 months before you can start thinking creatively and trying new things. But, when the time is right, do, push the boundaries a little bit. Do, think outside of the box. Do bring new ideas to the table and some fresh perspectives, because that can really, really not only help your local business, but that can benefit the entire franchise system as a whole. So, I think that's really important. I think a lot of people maybe really underestimate the value that comes from being part of a franchise system that's got a really strong culture amongst the franchisees, and this culture of, shared learning and collaboration. And, what's the old saying? Rising tide floats all boats, right?
Right.
It's to me, it's one of the absolute most valuable things that you get for buying into a franchise. And it's really kind of up to the franchisor to set the tone for what that culture is going to look like. But just like we've been talking about, right? Bicycle maker, bicycle rider, the franchisees have to keep the culture, right? Keep the tone that the franchisor has set with the culture, and keep building on it, right? If the franchisees don't participate, then doesn't really matter what the franchisor does or tries to do to create a good culture. It's got to be executed across all the franchisees. So last thing on that is anyone that I work with and they go on to invest in a franchise, I do a little call with them. We celebrate a little bit, but I give them some real life advice too. And part of that is like, look, all right, think of it. This is going to sound corny, but think of it as like you're starting middle school again, right? So you need to go figure out who the cool kids are. You also kind of need to figure out who the losers are, right? And you need to surround yourself with the people that are going to build you up and inspire you and that you can learn from. And then you need to be willing to pay that forward, once you're in a position to help others as well. Because every franchise system is going to have franchise owners that are negative and, probably not as successful as others. And they're going to have a million reasons as to why that is. And very rarely are any of those reasons related to them. And so, just don't be one of those types of franchise owners. Like there will be crappy days, there will be hard times, but you've got this network of other people out there that are building the same business that you're building. Like, lean into that, take advantage of that, contribute to that. There's a lot of benefit that comes from that.
Awesome. So reiterate those 3 just highlight points again for me.
Yeah. So realistic expectations, right? You gotta do the work as a franchisee, right?
Okay. Realistic expectations. Follow the system. Right? I love that one. Yep.
And then just participate and contribute to the system.
Got it. Awesome.
There's obviously other things that we could talk about. I mean, and I know we don't want to go too long on this, but one thing I will say is, different types of franchises are going to require different levels of involvement from the franchise owner, right? So, you mentioned this earlier, Alloy is built to be a very turnkey business. And I know that, a lot of your franchisees are, kind of investor minded and, looking for something that's more of an executive model, right? Where they're not probably in the studio doing the training themselves. And I think that's great, right? There's a lot of people out there that the model that Alloy's running is a beautiful thing for them, right? But just because it's designed to be more of this executive model, or you hear the terminology, semi-absentee, used pretty often in franchising, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do the work and you don't have to, have some level of involvement, right? And I think the more of that involvement, the more time you're willing to put in the beginning, the better of a foundation you're going to have for your business. I kind of alluded at the top of the podcast that, I feel like my wife and I have done really, really good as franchisees in one business, and we've been kind of average in the other. And, the other one, we started with, this kind of executive model mindset, right? Where we hired a general manager and, we hired him before we opened. He came to training with us. And, I think where we made some mistakes is, we were way more disengaged in the beginning than we should have been. And so, some of these things I just talked about in terms of like, the franchisee has to, take the tools and resources that the franchisor provides and implement them in their business. We didn't do a good enough job, doing that. And, we've had to make some adjustments, as a result of that. So just because it's an executive model, just because, you're not looking at this as something necessarily that's going to be a full-time commitment for you, like, give it the attention and the energy that it deserves, especially in the beginning, and you're going to get far, far better results, out of it long-term than, if you really just try to do it kind of hands off, I would say.
Dude, I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself. And if you guys aren't watching this on YouTube, I'm probably going to have like a neck injury by the end, because I'm just like heavily nodding the entire time, because like, yeah, man, you get it 100%. So there you have it, folks. From a guy who has placed thousands of people in franchise opportunities. He is a franchisee as well. If you're not watching this, he's got a bicep vein popping out now. That's a new development for him, because he's getting all lean and buff. So he's a dad. He's the overall rock star. Wes Barefoot, we appreciate you, brother.
My shoulder is going to be sore tomorrow, because I've been sitting here flexing the whole time. I was hoping you'd pick up on that bicep vein. So
yeah, I did. And
I had my daughter
gave it away
makeup to draw it on there. But no, man. Hey, look, I always have a blast. Always have a blast chatting with you, Rick. I appreciate everything that you're doing. Alloy is a phenomenal brand. You guys are doing such a good job, and appreciate the opportunity to share.
Hey, man, anytime. It's invaluable. Thanks, listeners. I'm sure appreciate it. And we'll have you back on when you get down to your leanest, buffest self. How about that?
I look forward to it.
All right, brother. Take it easy. Cheers.